On a freezing night in February of 1959, 9 experienced hikers camped on the slopes of a remote mountain deep in the Soviet Union. They were young. They were trained. And they were well prepared for the brutal winter conditions. But sometime during the night, something happened. Something so terrifying that the group suddenly cut open their tent from the inside and ran into the freezing wilderness. They ran without boots. Without coats. Without supplies. Weeks later, search teams discovered their bodies scattered across the mountain. Some were frozen to death. Others had crushed ribs, fractured skulls, and unexplained injuries. One victim was missing her tongue. Even stranger, investigators discovered radiation on some of their clothing. To this day, the deaths of the 9 hikers remain one of the most disturbing and mysterious incidents ever recorded. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. The expedition was organized by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Dyatlov was an experienced hiker and respected leader among his peers. He had successfully completed several challenging expeditions before. The goal of this trip was ambitious. The team planned to travel across the northern Ural Mountains and reach a remote mountain known as Otorten. To accomplish this, they would ski for hundreds of kilometers through deep snow and sub-zero temperatures. The group consisted of 8 other young hikers. Among them were Zinaida Kolmogorova, known for her cheerful personality. Ludmila Dubinina, an experienced outdoor adventurer. Rustam Slobodin, a skilled athlete and engineer. All of them were highly trained hikers. In fact, the expedition was classified as Category 3, the most difficult level of winter trekking in the Soviet Union. Before leaving, the group documented their journey with cameras and journals. They joked with each other. They sang songs. They took photographs smiling in the snow. Looking at these pictures today is chilling, because they would become the last known images of the group alive. The expedition began in late January of 1959. The hikers traveled by train to the edge of the Ural Mountains before continuing their journey by truck and on foot. Eventually they reached the final inhabited settlement in the region. From there, they would continue alone into the wilderness. The group skied across frozen rivers and dense forests. The terrain was difficult, but their spirits remained high. Diary entries from the hikers reveal moments of humor and friendship. They joked about the cold and sang songs as they traveled. But the weather was becoming increasingly dangerous. Strong winds and heavy snowfall slowed their progress. On January 28, one member of the group became ill and was forced to turn back. His name was Yuri Yudin. At the time, Yudin was disappointed he couldn't continue. But his illness would ultimately save his life. The remaining 9 hikers continued toward their destination. None of them would ever return. On February 1, the group reached the slopes of a mountain called Kholat Syakhl. The name comes from the language of the indigenous Mansi people. Its translation is haunting. It means, Mountain of the Dead. That afternoon, a snowstorm reduced visibility across the mountain. Instead of descending into the nearby forest for shelter, Dyatlov made the decision to camp on the exposed mountainside. Historians believe he may have wanted to practice camping in harsh conditions for future expeditions. The group pitched their large canvas tent on the snowy slope. Inside the tent, they prepared dinner and settled in for the night. According to their diaries, they were tired but in good spirits. None of them could have imagined what would happen next. Sometime during the night, an unknown event occurred. We know this because investigators later discovered something shocking. The tent had been cut open from the inside. Not unzipped. Not torn by weather. But deliberately slashed open with a knife. This meant the hikers had escaped through the side of the tent in a hurry. Even stranger, their boots, coats, and most of their equipment were left behind. Temperatures outside were estimated to be around -30 degrees Celsius. Running outside without proper clothing would almost certainly mean death, but something inside the tent had frightened them enough to take that risk. Footprints discovered in the snow showed the hikers had walked down the mountain in a group. They traveled nearly 1.5 kilometers toward a forest below. The tracks suggested they were not running wildly. Instead, they appeared to be moving quickly but in an organized manner. What could have forced them to leave their shelter in such extreme conditions? That question remains unanswered. Weeks passed without any word from the expedition. Family members began to worry. Eventually, search teams composed of students, volunteers, and soldiers were sent to locate the missing hikers. The search operation was difficult. Heavy snow and brutal weather conditions made the mountains nearly impossible to navigate. But after several days of searching, rescuers finally discovered the hikers' tent. The sight was disturbing. The tent was partially collapsed under snow. And the side had been cut open from the inside. All of the hikers' belongings were still inside. Boots, clothing, food supplies. It looked as if the group had abandoned the tent suddenly and without preparation. Rescuers followed the footprints leading away from the campsite. They led toward the forest. At the edge of the forest, rescuers discovered the first two bodies. They belonged to Yuri Krivonischenko and Yuri Doroshenko. The men were found near the remains of a small fire beneath a large cedar tree. They were barefoot and dressed only in underwear. Their hands were burned, suggesting they had tried desperately to stay warm. Broken branches on the cedar tree indicated that one of them had climbed the tree. Perhaps to look for the tent, or something else. Soon, 3 more bodies were discovered between the cedar tree and the tent. These hikers appeared to have been attempting to return to the campsite. But they collapsed in the snow before reaching it. At this point, 5 of the 9 hikers had been found. The remaining 4 were still missing. 2 months later, search teams made another disturbing discovery. 4 additional bodies were found buried under snow inside a ravine. And their injuries were far more severe. One victim had a crushed skull. Another had multiple broken ribs. Medical examiners later stated the injuries were similar to those caused by a high-impact car crash. But strangely, there were almost no external wounds. One of the victims, Lyudmila Dubanina, was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips. Investigators believed animals or environmental conditions may have caused some of these injuries, but the overall pattern of trauma remained difficult to explain. As the investigation continued, even more mysterious details emerged. Some of the hikers' clothing tested positive for radiation. Several witnesses reported seeing strange orange lights in the sky around the time of the incident. And soon after the investigation began, Soviet authorities abruptly closed the case. Their official statement was vague. They concluded that the hikers died due to a compelling natural force. No further explanation was given. More than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass incident continues to fascinate investigators and mystery enthusiasts around the world. 9 experienced hikers entered the mountains. Only their frozen bodies were found. And the question remains: what really happened on the Mountain of the Dead? If you enjoyed this mystery, watch our next video about the Elisa Lam elevator mystery.